I recently published an overview video of Randy Flint's Cascadia, a game in which you draft habitat tiles and wildlife tokens to build up your own section of the Pacific Northwest and populate it with animals. During that video, I compared this drafting game to another drafting game, Michael Kiesling's Sanssouci, that was originally released by Ravensburger in 2013 and that has been re-released by Chilean publisher Fractal Juegos, with this title scheduled to be available at Spiel in October 2022. So what is old is new again, and I thought I'd talk about Sanssouci in more detail for those who are not familiar with the game. In Sanssouci, each player has their own individual garden board where you will be redesigning the gardens at the Sanssouci Palace in order to satisfy nobles who like to walk through a garden and look at stuff. You may or may not care whether nobles are happy about looking at gardens, but you want a job, so you are trying to satisfy these nobles better than anyone else. Each player has their own board with a slightly different arrangement of printed tiles, and that's important only so that you value tiles a bit differently from the shared central drafting board. The game lasts 18 rounds. Each player has a deck of 18 cards, and during each round you are going to play a card from your hand, draft a tile, add it to your board, ideally score some points, and draw a new card. After 18 rounds, you're going to have some endgame scoring based on your hidden cards and the arrangement of tiles that you have in your garden. So, cards come in two different types. You have one card for each of the 9 types of garden displays with labyrinths, statues, pagodas, topiaries, staircases, and so on. If you play one of those cards, you see what tiles of those type are available in the drafting area. So with a pagoda card, I have my choice of either of these pagodas, and they will go on the board in the pagoda column in a row matching where they come from. So I can take this pagoda and put it in the gray row of the pagoda column, or this one in the blue row. My choice. So after I place that down, I move one of the nobles down to look at something. And they're all very particular. They care only about one thing. This one only wants to look at statues and doesn't care about anything else. When you move down a noble, you will score points based on the row that it reaches. So if this noble goes to the second row, I score 2 points. There's a gap here, so this noble can't go and look at these pagodas further down, but ideally I will connect things over time so that they can explore further in the garden. I draw a replacement card. Well, why am I trying to draft anything? Let's draw a replacement tile out of the bag. Well, I mentioned the hidden scoring cards. There are 9 of these scoring cards, one for each garden type. And at the end of the game, you score points based on how far down the nobles are in whatever 2 types you were dealt. So I have fountains and arches. I will score for these nobles as I bring them down over the course of the game, but at the end of the game, I score them again based on whatever row they reached. So ideally, I will get them down to the bottom. So I look at what I have available. I've got a labyrinth card. There's only one labyrinth available. It would have to go in the red row there. I also have a yellow and gray card. So I can draft anything from the yellow row or anything from the gray row, and it has to go on the board in the appropriate column and in the matching row. So since I want fountains, there's a fountain here and a fountain here. This fountain is already printed on the board, so I don't need a purple fountain, but I can spend this yellow-gray card, take a yellow fountain, put this here, drop this guy down, and score 3 points. So pull out a replacement. Now, what's interesting as you start looking at what's available on the board, there are 9 types of different things. There are multiple tiles of the same type in the bag, but the arrangement, what's on display, well, it's going to fluctuate a lot over the course of the game, and you have to make do with what's available in order to have plans and satisfy whatever you're trying to do. So, for example, I may not really want this labyrinth, but okay, maybe what I want to do is make it so that I can use my labyrinth card in a different way. So if I spend this card for red and I take the red labyrinth, I'll put it over here. I'm going to draw a replacement. I'm going to move down a noble. Well, one thing you can do when you're moving nobles, they have to stay in that column. This noble only wants to look at arches, but they can take a roundabout way to get there. So they can walk through the paths, come over here, and I'll score 3 points for that noble reaching that space. And now on my next turn, if there are no labyrinths available, I can spend a labyrinth card to take any tile I want. So I took the labyrinth, I didn't really need it, I put it in the wrong orientation on my board, but now the way is clear so that I can spend that labyrinth to get something else. I want fountains. Okay, this is a fountain in the purple row. I already have a fountain printed in that purple row. And when you draft a tile that matches something that is already on your board, you get to use this a different way. You can flip the tile over. Well, rather, you have to flip the tile over and you place it anywhere in that same row or that same column. So I can take this and put this down here to build a path to go deeper down in this level. I can't move this noble onto that space because this guy wants to look at fountains. That's not a fountain. That's people working. And there's nothing nobles hate worse than looking at people working. At least that's what I've read. So I can't move this noble down, but I have given myself somewhere to build off in the future. If I get a blue staircase, if I get a red fountain, I can then jump down to that space, or this noble who likes staircases can follow this path and jump down here. So you don't have to build everything in order to get the nobles down in this point-rich area. You just need some paths for them to walk on. So I draft this tile, I place here, I move down a noble, I score 2 points. I don't have good point opportunities for these nobles now. These would only go down and get 1 point. These can't go down at all. Maybe if I can get something here, but that doesn't look possible with what's on display. Right? Purple staircase, yellow staircase. Okay, maybe I do a yellow staircase. I at least give myself some way to score points and get 3 more points. And you continue on in this way. You can keep track of the cards you've played. You know, yep, I played Staircase, Labyrinth, Pagoda. I'm not going to see them again. I still have arches and this little T shape, this central garden area. Those are all going to come up in time. The other cards you have available, it's all the color combinations, and you have 1 Joker card that allows you to take anything. But you can sometimes use your cards, as I demonstrated, to take anything anyway, depending upon what's here. So you continue playing, 18 rounds. You're going to end up, you only have 1 card in the hand at the end of the game. You have to play that card and take something. You move those final nobles. At the end of the game, you're going to score again for the nobles based on where they've dropped down to. Right now, I would get a bonus 6 points for them being here. In addition, if you have completed a column of tiles, that's 5 points. If you have completed a row across the board, you score 10 minus the row number. So completing this bottom row is worth only 4 points. Completing this top row is worth 8. But if you can complete this bottom row and complete a column to that bottom row, that means you can take all of these nobles and end up dropping them down to the bottom row. So of course, that is way more beneficial. So it makes sense that the bonus points are less than completing something higher up. And one interesting element about the game, So your scoring points during the game, you got some in-game scoring, you got randomness based on the tiles. You adjust the number of tiles in the bag based on the player count. So with 2 players, there are 5 copies of each tile in the bag. With 3 players, there are 7. With 4, there's 9. The numbers all match up with Azul, which is another Michael Kiesling design. All right, you get a bonus for the column as you're completing the columns. It all feels very mathy and similar how things are worked out so that you have roughly the same number of tiles available of each type based on the player count. But you can take those tiles and use them in different ways. So it's interesting to see how some tiles get buried. How initially there's 3 arches on the board. There's 3 of these central spaces. And right now, you may not care about them, but maybe they will become valuable later. If I can get this yellow one here, I don't have the cards for it at the moment because I can only take from these rows. This one lets me take only this tile right here. But if later on I can take this tile and now I'm connected this path here. And when you're connecting paths, you can think about dropping this guy down here and scoring 4 points, or you can say, I'm going to stop and get 3 points. Because next turn, if nothing else has come up, now I can drop him down and get 4 points. So you have a bit of a press your luck element as to how quickly you want to drop your nobles down the board to score points. Because again, if I drop them for 4 now and I can't connect anything on my next turn, well, now I get 1 point. And now I get another point. Now I get another point. And now I have no scoring opportunities whatsoever. It all depends on the tiles that are available and how you can hook them together to make paths and connections that you can then maximize the points on by moving those nobles properly. So there's a lot of elements to consider based on the limited number of turns available. You always know how many turns you have left just based on the number of cards that you have yet to play. You can see what everyone else has taken, except of course when they flip something over, and keep that in mind as you're trying to make plans for the future. Should I draft something now? Can I hope that something comes up later? This is useless right now, this staircase, because I've already dropped this noble past this point. Thankfully, I don't have the staircase card still around. I have the arches still in my deck. There's lots of arches available. Right now, this is useless because I've passed that space. This is useful because I have that tile and I can flip it face down. This one's possibly even more useful because I can put it here. And if I can make a connection, then I can drop it down even further. Make those jumps down in order to score more points. There's a relatively quick overview of the game. There's one expansion included in the Ravensburger edition of the game that came out in 2013. So let me remove these tiles. You have this double-sided board. You are going to choose a side and put it down on your board after you look at your endgame scoring cards. And during play, if you put any tile on these red negative spaces, you lose that many points. If you put a face down gardener tile on this +3 space, you score 3 points. If you put the proper tile in here, then you score bonus points as well. So it gives you a few hot spots that you want to avoid, some places that you definitely want to cover. It just makes you, again, value tiles a little differently based on whatever is currently available. But of course, you still have the larger overarching plans of what you were trying to do based on the endgame scoring and just whatever you've drafted so far. One other bit of interest is only with the Fractal Juegos version of the game. This is the expansion, a boar. That's it. Each player gets a boar. It starts in the central staircase. And the only reason the boar matters, well, if during the game you put a tile where the boar is located, you scare the boar away, you score 1 point, and you move the boar to an adjacent space. That seems so minor, so trivial. Also, so difficult to do because you need a blue staircase in order to squash that boar. You're not actually squashing it right now. You're moving it aside to another location. And if I put a staircase here, now it's going to move again to a free space that is not occupied. So it cannot go here. It cannot go back down to the staircase. Why this is important is because at the end of the game, if this boar is still in your garden, everyone is disgusted because you have a boar in your garden. That is not what nobles want to look at. And you lose points based on the number of free spaces that boar can reach, which right now is everything except this space. So over time, you want to put tiles down and fence in the boar. So if I put this topiary here, well, that's great. Ideally, I can reach it at some point with the noble, but in addition, the boar is now in a space with only three empty spaces. So I'll lose only 3 points at endgame. And if you can corner the boar completely, if this one ended up going in yellow and now I put another tile in here and the boar is completely surrounded, has nowhere to go, well, you put him up as a trophy in the Sanssouci Palace and score 3 points. It's an extremely minor expansion. It's kind of funny that that's all it is 4 boar tokens, but it added a nice twist with how you valued things, because the potential for what you could lose is huge to begin with, and you need to start hemming that in and cornering it in order to minimize the damage. It's an interesting additional element, such a minor change, and if you have the original 2013 version of the game, well, you can add that with some boar tokens of your own. There's an overview of Sanssouci, which I played 9 times, 4 on the old version, 5 on the new, with all player counts 2, 3, and 4 on review copies of the game in both cases. This older version, it's very classic European style, with dude holding plans for what is being built. You have just seen this so many times on so many games. It's just the standard for what you're doing as a representation of what you're doing in the game. You're building something. So let's put a guy on here who's got plans for building something. So yeah, we're used to that. We've seen that a lot. In the new Fractal Juegos version, you zoom in a bit, and now presumably it's your hands holding the plans, depending on your skin color. Of course, you are in charge, not this other person, but you. You're the one holding the plans and looking at what's being built, and ideally being satisfied with what you have done. The graphic differences are, well, the Fractal Juegos has a darker look to it than the Ravensburger one, just with the layout of the board, which may or may not be an issue with you having trouble seeing things or not. Haven't really had an issue except with the different patterns used for things. So the pagoda here has a different look than the pagoda here, but they're both pagodas. And this version does the same thing. And I understand if you've got tiles in the board, it's going to look more attractive if you have different pagodas in a garden, because that's probably what you would want in an actual garden. Not every single thing looking the same, but a variety of things to look at as you're walking around the garden. But when people are playing the game, you need to make sure they know these are all topiaries and these are all gazebos and so forth, to ensure that you are playing correctly. The graphic difference carries over with other elements. Again, lighter and darker. This has room for tiles and stacks on the board with a big point track around the outside. Here the point track's a bit smaller, and you have a bag for the tiles, so no need to make stacks. The tiles are labeled in both cases with player count on the back because, as I mentioned, you adjust the number of tiles in the game based on the number of players. So you will have to remove some in order to account for that. The expansion board's also a bit different, as you might expect. Now, let's talk a bit more about the gameplay difference, because again, I initially compared Cascadia with Sanssouci, saying that I preferred Sanssouci to Cascadia. And that's because Cascadia in general, as one person commented on my post, is very smooth. That's not a bad thing. In general, you want games to be smooth, especially the rules. Ideally, the rules are as smooth as possible, as frictionless as possible, so that you can play without having to think about what's allowed. You can internalize that and make choices based upon that. At least that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking at a rule set and a game, how much can the game just vanish and I think only about my choices available in the game and not what's legal or not. That is true in Cascadia, but the gameplay itself is also rather smooth, mostly because every choice in the game seems to be mildly positive. And ideally, you have choices that are a bit more positive than other people. You have 4 pairs of habitat tiles and wildlife tokens available to you. You're going to choose one of those pairs. They're generally all good because the tile is going to expand your landscape. You're fighting for majorities against other people. You're going to add something on there, and that tile is going to add a point or two as it matches existing landscapes. The wildlife token is going to go down. You're going to score some points for it. And the points just pile up over the course of the game. And again, ideally you add more, but everything's open to you. You can choose whatever is there and you just add on wherever you want. The landscape can go anywhere. And the wildlife token has to match, but in 2 games, we only had one instance of a person not wanting to place or being able to place a wildlife token, in which case it goes back in the bag. It just flows and everything adds. I described it as bricklaying because you're just adding to what comes before. It's very methodical in terms of what you're doing. Whereas this game, sorry, I should hold the new one, right? Show the one that's currently available. This game works differently in that you are restricted in the tiles that are available based on the cards that you have in your hand. You only have 2 cards in your hand. Those generally give you a couple of choices. The color ones always give you 4 choices because there's 2 tiles in each color row. The feature tiles, well, maybe they give you 3 choices or 4, 2, 1. 1 is the worst because it's often a thing where you don't want to put it in that space. Can you work around that? Or if there's 0, in which case you have the freedom to do whatever you want. And you can engineer that freedom for yourself in some cases. It depends upon what's drawn from the bag, of course, but you have more opportunities for setting up future plays. Depends on the player count to some degree, because with 2 players, the tiles change over a lot less frequently because there's only one other person going before you take your turn again. So often you can set yourself up in order to take something on your next turn. I'm taking a labyrinth and putting it in the red row. Well, hey, there's another labyrinth tile already in the red row, and I plan to take that next turn, which means I'll get to flip it over and I can put paths somewhere in that row or column. That's what I want to do because I'm trying to connect things. So I'm making plays to build upon what comes in the future. You can still do that with 3 and 4 players. It's a little harder because there are more people going, which means there's more turnover in the tiles available, but you can still make those choices. You can take the last pagoda and then try to use your pagoda card for something else, or you just hold on to that card and hope that other choices come up. So you have complications in trying to do what you want, which is, in the end, score the most points. You don't really care how. You're trying to engineer a way to make that happen. Okay, you do care how, because you've got the end game scoring for getting nobles down to certain levels. But if you can maximize everything else, maybe the end game scoring won't matter quite as much if you can score really well over the course of play. So you're trying to set things up more in Sanssouci where you have a chance of failing. Things, my board's all messed up now, and I can't hold it up anyway because then the tiles will fall off. But you're trying to set things up. You can place tiles anywhere. So I can start by placing one here, and then I can place one here, and now it's giving me 2 possibilities of how I'm going to connect those. And then, of course, I have to connect it to something else in order to move those figures down the board. When you move figures down the board as well, you can move them over, you go down a path, you can go over here, and you can go up again. So I've had some games where you build a column down to the bottom, build something down here, and then build this back up. And so I can take this guy on the staircase move him here and he gets 4 points, and then 5 points, and then 6 points. And so you're setting yourself up for these big scores. It's sometimes high risk for what you're trying to do. Is the tile going to come up in a place where you can use it? You've got the luck of the draw for where it's going to end up on the board, because maybe another player is going to take off the yellow and then the staircase drops in yellow and you really wanted staircase in red or gray. Well, okay, it didn't work out, but maybe you can take it and flip it over and make paths, at least build something to work your way down. There's more variety in how the games play out, because it's not simply draft a tile and token and just boom, 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 pump it all together. There's chances for you to fail. You're taking tiles to try to set things up and hope stuff works out in the future, and it might not work. I really enjoy highly tactical games that have an element like that where you can fail, because that also means you have the chance to succeed. You can do something that feels, I want to say more clever, but it does feel more clever. It feels like I'm doing something where I have a plan and I'm going to make things happen, or at least give myself the chance to make things happen. But that's not the case in Cascadia, because everything can go pretty much, all the habitat tiles can go anywhere, and there's such slight differences in where they're going to go. I don't care as much. It's happening over 20 turns, and I'm still going to try to score as many points as possible, but there's not a variety of what is happening there. Whereas here, sometimes the tile comes up, that's exactly what you've been hoping for, or you figure out the right way to use it to make a connection and move people down. Oh, yes. I want games with fist-pumping moments where it's like, oh, it came together exactly as I had hoped. I did it. I did the thing. And so I feel more of a sense of satisfaction when playing Sanssouci, because it gives me the chance for those moments. Also moments where it doesn't come together, but let's not, just forget about those. Don't worry about those, right? To succeed bigger and to have that feeling of success, you have to risk failure. You have to risk it not happening. And I want that in the game because I find it personally more satisfying. So that's why I would always choose Sanssouci over Cascadia. It gives me those moments. It gives you those moments as well. And it lets you squash a boar. Side bonus. Life goal.